Hello. So in the next 4 sessions we're going to build some economic models to talk about the link between greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and what we as economists refer to as those greenhouse gas emissions as a global pollution externality. And in this session I'm going to give you the sort of general ideas, and then in the following sessions we'll build a more formal model. So why greenhouse gas pollution? Why is it a problem? Basically, you and I and businesses like products that involve greenhouse gas pollution as part of the production system. So we like electricity to put on our lights, to keep us warm, to cook our food, and in many cases that electricity is created by the burning of coal and gas. Or we like travelling. We don't like walking very much, we would prefer to go by car. And that car uses, of course, petroleum products. So here are some of these examples. Combustion of fossil fuels for heat and energy. Ruminants, they are one of the worst polluters. In a country like Australia, over a quarter of our pollution largely comes from cattle and sheep, burping and excreting methane. But you and I like the meat, the fibre and the milk that we get from that. Currently in most countries and in most economic systems, so it doesn't matter whether you have an American free enterprise system or you have a North Korean highly centralised system, we just dump these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for free. And as economists speak, that means that the atmosphere is what we call a public good. Nobody really owns it, and so we just treat it as free. So if we want to throw some extra gases or some garbage in the atmosphere, we just do it and ignore the costs. But the problem is greenhouse gases do have a cost. And we call these costs external costs. We talk about internal costs as when you and I exchange some money to buy some milkshakes or a cup of coffee. Then we wear the costs, the producer, the cafe of making the coffee. I have to shell out some money which is not available for something else. They're the internal costs. But when I put these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and they affect climate change down the track, and that makes life more difficult for somebody, then that's what I call an external cost. And most products that we produce, directly or indirectly, have some degree of external cost of greenhouse gases. And so what are the costs of these greenhouse gases? Well, as we've discussed in other parts of this subject, they add to the global stock of greenhouse gas emissions. That causes climate change, and then that climate change upsets our food production systems, gets the sea level to rise, gives us more severe events and so on. Those are the external costs. So let's think a little bit more now about how we make decisions on what to produce and what to consume. And the story is that we really have to make choices between less pollution and lower climate change costs, or more costly but less polluting products and production methods. So let me illustrate this. Think about the production of electricity. In most countries, the cheapest way to get electricity is by burning coal and gas. But that involves greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. On the other hand, we could get our electricity from nuclear, and countries like France get over 70% of their electricity from nuclear, or we could get it from renewables like solar and wind. Now, under current technology, they're much more expensive, but they don't create very much pollution. Or if I want to get between A and B, might be from my home to the university, or to go on a holiday. Well, I could do it in a way that doesn't use much greenhouse gases. I could ride a bike, or I could even walk. But that takes a long time, takes a lot of energy. More likely, I'm going to take a car because that's quick and easy, but it involves a lot of pollution. Or I can think about my diet. If I really like meat, and if I eat beef and lamb from animals that do a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, then yes, I get the beef and the lamb, but there's also a lot of pollution. Or I could use something like chicken. Chickens don't make nearly as much pollution per kilo. But most of us like a variety of diet. And so here we have to make some choices. How do we best make those choices? Do I have the options that are relatively cheap, make my dollar go a long way, and create a lot of pollution? Or do I in fact say, no, I'm a bit worried about this pollution, but it's going to cost me quite a bit of money. How am I going to make those decisions? Well, if I leave it to a market, businesses and households decide on what to produce. So whether they produce electricity from gas or from nuclear or from solar, are they going to ignore the greenhouse gas emissions? Well, in a market system, you do. But others bear the costs of that pollution. They add to the stock of greenhouse gas emissions. And as a result, when we ignore those costs, we produce too much of pollution and incur too high a climate change costs. And we do that by choosing those pollution-intensive products. So the coal and gas-fired electricity rather than renewable electricity. Eating beef and lamb rather than eating chicken. Driving to work and on holidays rather than walking or taking a bicycle. And we choose more pollution-intensive methods of production. So partly reversing these choices to less polluting ones would reduce greenhouse gas emissions and would actually increase national well-being. So how would we correct what we call these market failures? And here the market failure is that I've ignored the external cost of pollution. So I have to recognise that the total costs of pollution include private costs of producing our coffee and electricity and so on, of labour, materials and machines. That's what the market takes into account. But we also have to take into account the external costs. That pollution goes up there, that causes climate change, and then there are costs of climate change. And we'll argue that that will generate a net benefit for society. We'll choose less polluting products and production methods. That'll mean less climate change. So we shift from production and consumption of pollution-intensive to pollution-extensive products. So that is, we might do a bit more walking and bicycling and less car driving. We might actually decide to turn the air conditioner down a little bit and wear some warmer clothes. And we choose production methods that involve less pollution. So that's using gas rather than coal to produce electricity, or going all the way to choosing renewables rather than fossil fuels. But of course, many of these changes are going to be driven by technology. So all of you young budding scientists out there looking for a future, a world that less pollutes is going to require great scientific advances. But there is trouble. I've drawn a picture now almost of everybody's a winner. The truth is that there are some people who are losers. You know, what if we have fairly lazy people who really don't like bicycling and don't want to give up their car? We're now saying, you shall walk to university at least one day a month. That person's not going to be very happy, but that's reduced pollution. And that's one of the challenges we have in economic policy. So how do we correct the market failures for too much pollution? Well, back to our examples, we want to recognise the external costs of greenhouse gas emissions. So we'd have to shift some electricity production from fossil fuels to renewables. We'd have to choose more efficient machinery and household appliances. So when you buy a new washing machine or dishwasher, you choose the option that involves about half the amount of electricity to the existing one. We'd have to do some more walking and transport. And we might have to shift our diet away, more poultry, less beef. And lots more money spent on R&D. So what we're going to do in the next session is develop that model in a more formal way, and we're going to use that model to see how decisions actually change. So we'll compare decisions where we don't recognise greenhouse gas emissions and when we do. We'll highlight that society can actually gain by reducing its pollution. So in aggregate, there's a net gain, but of course there will be some losers. And we'll even go further. We'll actually derive the level of pollution which would be the best for society's perspective.